Well, that's true. We have to be able to get the American people to realize that until we have monetary reform, and by that I mean until we take away from the federal government its power to create money and spend it as it likes without any accountability, until we do something about that, you're not going to see any real change. It's just going to be a word, because a bankrupt nation like the United States can still do whatever it wants to do in the world, because it can create its own money, and that has ramifications for all the rest of us. But that's where my focus is, and it's where I think, obviously, the focus should be, and that's what men like Peter Schiff, who are so knowledgeable in that area, are so important and valuable to us and so worthy of support.
Yeah, I mean, and it's just, I love this guy's track record, just even on a real simple basis, just by watching a 5-minute video like the one we just played, you can see, going back to 2005, 2006, him predicting exactly the situation we're going to be in. And you have these other guys, he's on financial networks. These are major financial networks now. He's on CNBC and others because he's a well-respected, he runs a well-respected investment firm, Euro Pacific Capital. And so he's invited on a pretty regular basis to share his opinion, and he's been predicting this stuff. He's been predicting the onset of the recession. He's been predicting the drop in housing prices, the popping of the real estate bubble, so to speak, way back, and he was actually being laughed at. And so it's really kind of sweet circumstances now for him to now consider being right on those issues and being laughed at and being mocked, for him now to decide, let's take this to the next step, and maybe let's get into Senate where he can really maybe start to put a group together, maybe start making some changes within the government.
Well, you're right, Ray. That's about him being in demand now. He and Dr. Paul both, but you are seeing him in more mainstream broadcast now, because people are demanding to hear someone with that perspective. They're tired of the other answers that don't work, the answers that are something like, well, we haven't tried the things that don't work enough, or we haven't done enough of what's proven not to work, and so forth. They're looking for other answers, and that's why certain media outlets are starting to realize that, and to broadcast his views and Ron Paul's views. Ron Paul, I was reading the other day in an article somewhere, is that Ron Paul is the second most in-demand politician in the world as a speaker and someone to listen to.
Now, how about that? That sounds like progress.
Well, of course, the number one is obviously Barack Obama. So those are two polar opposites, I would say. It's interesting to see them 1 and 2.
It sure is. It sure would have been interesting to see them go head-to-head in a presidential campaign, too, had Ron Paul received the GOP nomination.
Well, those are the things that dreams are made of.
It sure is.
That type of thing. Maybe that dream will come true someday. Who knows?
Maybe we can take one little step here with a senator rather than a president. You know, maybe there is some opportunity. I'm not saying it's going to be easy. And like I said, just like Ron Paul found major opposition within his own party, it may turn out that Peter Schiff is in the same boat.
Well, that's true, but think of how much easier it would be for Ron Paul, and how much comfort he would take in the fact that if he had a man like Peter Schiff in the Senate, who was elected to the Senate in 2010, further on down the line in 2012, it seems to me would be a great comfort and help and benefit and so forth.
Oh, no question about it. I think we're really potentially on the verge. As you said, the message is growing. These guys are in demand because they're answering questions. They're giving sensible answers to real concerns that Americans have about how we got in this mess. And, if we can send kind of a caucus up there to Congress, that is the goal of Retake Congress. And that is why we're doing this event here today with one of the first real exciting runs for Congress, potentially to be announced with Peter Schiff. But Retake Congress wants to basically do that. Send Ron Paul up some friends to caucus with up there in Congress. Let's face it, if we elect some candidates that do nothing, now I'm not belittling some of the candidates that are running, but if we send candidates who do nothing more than get up to Congress and say, okay, Dr. Paul, what do we do? I'd say that's a pretty good step in the right direction.
Well, that's exactly right. It is a step in the right direction. But we do have, in 2010, great candidates who have a real possibility. You know, Peter Schiff, if indeed he does become a candidate, and as I pointed out earlier, we in the Constitution Party have Dr. Marshall DeRosa in Florida, who's also running for the U.S. Senate, and the two Republicans that are competing for the Republican nomination, Charlie Crist, who, of course, is governor of Florida, and Marco Rubio, who is a young man who was, at one point, was Speaker of the Florida House of Representatives. They're fighting it out for that nomination. And I've talked to people who believe Crist will win. I've talked to people who believe Rubio will win. But regardless, Marshall is going to be running against them. So there are people out there who understand what the problem is and are committed to its correction and the restoration of the country. So it is important to support them.
Absolutely, and one of the things that I do like about the Constitution Party is their name on its own, the Constitution Party. I mean, the Constitution is probably the best document to found a government ever written, and the principles laid out therein really do lay out some foundation. While the document is not perfect, it did do a pretty good job for a long time, and unfortunately, we have just swayed so far from it that at this point our country almost is unrecognizable in constitutional terms.
Well, we didn't choose that name by accident, and yes, I mean, how many times I've heard Ron Paul say almost all of our problems could be solved if we would just return to the Constitution, but you use the term unrecognizable. It certainly is unrecognizable to anyone who was born prior to about 1960 or even 1970. To anyone born after that period, this is all they've ever seen.
Right.
So it's the only country they know. But many of us, I'm certainly in that category, we were born before that. And we've seen a different country, and we've read about a different country in the history books, and we study its documents and so forth. But the majority, certainly those young, energetic people in positions of power and so forth, for the most part, this is all they've ever known.
That's true. That's all so many of us have known. You know, life under a fiat money system where a central bank, a privately owned corporation that is called a central bank, creates money out of thin air and loans it out at interest to the government, to large industry, and and we look at these bailouts and things like that going on, where this independent, privately owned corporation is printing money out of thin air and handing it to banks. Now, we talk about this crisis that we're in, where the American people, where people are losing their homes left and right. This same corporation could give the money to the people to pay off their homes, but they don't do that, Darrell.